president-elect and my successor at some point down the road, Mark Harrington. Mark, as you can tell, is not a native Texan, but he got here as soon as he could. He is a extraordinarily well-respected immigration attorney here in the city of Houston, and has specialized in that, as far as I'm aware, throughout his practice. And this topic today is going to be in the changes that we can expect in the immigration field as a result in the changes in administration in light of President Biden assuming the White House on the 20th. So with that, Mark, take it away.
As Bill said, I've been doing I'm an immigration lawyer. I've been doing it for 20 years now. I started back in the year 2000. And before that, I worked in Washington, D.C. for Congress from 1995 to 2000. I spent a few years working for a senator from New Mexico, Pete Domenici. And then I moved over to the House of Representatives side to work for the House Committee on Science. And I mention that because, as most people, understand, American immigration is always political. Politics is always right up front when it comes to immigration, and that's always been the truth. So occasionally I tell my clients that when they worry about how political immigration is today, well, it's always been that way. It's always a political issue. I take, when it comes to the policy and the politics of immigration, I take a little bit of a contrarian take. There's a sense that among the more conservative people, there's a worry that if there's too much immigration, if the immigration is too much and too fast, there would be serious cultural changes to the United States. And as a result, political changes to the United States. At the same time, among the more people on the left, there is a hope that if immigration happens very quickly, there will be a demographic and therefore a political change. I happen to disagree with both of them. That I really don't think that the incoming immigrants don't end up being as liberal as the Democrats hope. They don't end up being, it's not that big of it's not what people worry about that actually causes the problems. I'm a big believer that it's more technology that has much more of a cultural impact. If you look back over the last 20 years with Facebook and Twitter and everything like that. In addition to that, and I'll say this just before to get into the more technical issues. In my own life, my wife and I have 3 children. They've all gone through the Houston public school system. I have a son who's a senior at Lamar High School. My younger son is in 5th grade, local public elementary school. And my son in the elementary school, there are students from 40 different countries in his grade. And yet all those little kids, 10, 12-year-old guys, they're all Americans. And I say that because nowadays, due to technology, due to the way things are so different now than they were in 1960 or 1940, my take is the process of assimilation is faster now than it's ever been. It's something that a lot of the parents worry at times. But I always want to start off with that. And then in terms of changes, one of the first changes that happened since the election, in fact, that happened one day before Biden was sworn in, is that President Trump granted what is essentially a protective status to people in the United States who are from Venezuela. He issued a proclamation granting to about 90,000 people who were originally from Venezuela, who are in the United States and do not currently have an immigration status, a status known as deferred enforced deportation. It's just a technical term that people call it DED. It simply means that the government will not deport those people back to Venezuela. And while they're here, they can, if they would like to, apply for a work authorization card so that they can legally work in the United States. Now that's something that the Trump crowd did just literally the day before President Biden was sworn in. As most of you have seen on the news, one of the great traditions of the presidency is that on day one, the president signs a whole bunch of executive orders. For President Biden, he got rid of what's known as the travel ban. He made some changes to the DACA or the Dreamer programs. And he made some other changes about the adjudication of cases. And it was good to see, and it was not unexpected. But on a much bigger issue when it comes to immigration is that on day one, he submitted his big giant immigration bill to Congress. And that's really, in my opinion, where the big issues of immigration are going to happen over the next probably 2 to 3 months. So I went down and just made a couple of the highlights. There's a lot going on in the bill, but for most people outside of the world of immigration, what he's done is he said in this bill that among all the dreamers, that is young children who are brought into the United States, primarily from Mexico, Central America, South America, had they arrived under age 15, they will be in a position where they can apply for a green card immediately. If they're in status, I mean, if they're here prior to January 21st. And that's a really big, that'll be a big step. But again, as with all of these things I'm going to talk about, they're at this point, and this again is my take, they are merely pieces of legislation at this point. In addition to that, he's talked about in the campaign that he's going to put all the undocumented immigrants on a pathway to a green card, on a pathway to citizenship. And the way it looks now, they're going to provide those people with something called temporary protective status, which is again, like what President Trump did for the Venezuelans. This would allow people who are here without immigration status to remain here and get a work card. And after a certain number of years, it appears at this point to be 5 years, that 5 years on, if they haven't gotten any additional trouble with the police, there are no arrests, they've been working, they've paid taxes, that they'll be able to take the final step and become to get a permanent green card. What makes it interesting is this. There's big news that the Democrats run the Senate. They have the House of Representatives, so they can pretty much do what they want. In the United States Senate, it's a 50-50 game with the vice president giving 51 votes to the Democrats. But they still need, meaning President Biden and the Democrats, may still need to get 60 votes to invoke cloture. That is the old filibuster rule, which means in order to pass a big social piece of legislation like this, it will need to be, to a certain extent, bipartisan, which is a big, big issue. Now, the Republican Party is in terms of immigration, is a bit more diverse than most people will give it credit for. There are those, especially on the business side, who would very much like to see an immigration bill go through. And then there are those who do not want any kind of a program that will either reward people who came here illegally or give an incentive for more people to arrive. And on top of that, there's a really big, and this again goes back to the politics of it. There's a real question as to whether or not, who gets credit for doing this. I'll tell you, I started doing immigration back in the year 2000, which was the last time the government allowed people who were out of status to be sponsored either by a family member or by an employer and jump through all the hoops. What made it interesting at the time is that back then, the Republicans ran the United States Senate with 55 Republican senators. And yet, Bill Clinton, it was toward the end of the Clinton years, he and the Republicans could work together to pass what was a significant piece of legislation. And that is, in many ways, is the $64,000 question, is given the real bitterness right now on Capitol Hill, and that's true. There's a lot of bitterness between the two parties. Will they be able to work together to get something done? I will say that not just myself, but a good number of us doing immigration law are very concerned that although there's a huge talk about getting some kind of a pathway to citizenship, a pathway to a green card for the 11 million or the 15 million undocumented immigrants that people talk about, there are other policy issues that may really swamp it. I'll give you an example. 12 years ago, when President Biden became vice president, there was a tremendous amount of optimism among immigration lawyers, especially those that are Democrats. They had President Obama, they had Joe Biden, and it ended up that the Obama-Biden crowd, they spent all their political capital on healthcare issues because that was their big priority. If everyone can remember all the fights about Obamacare. And although at that time, like today, the Democrats had the White House, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, they could have gotten through a pretty big immigration bill. I've always thought that if they had done it the right way, they could have dragged a significant percentage of the Republicans along with them. Again, especially among pro-business Republicans, and they both chose not to do that, and also the politics of the day drove everything toward Obamacare. So there's a concern that this year, the big giant issue, and I argue it's bigger than Obamacare, is COVID. Getting a COVID bill through, how big it's going to be, what's going to may take all the oxygen out of the room. So that's going to be a big thing to see. I chatted with an immigration lawyer friend of mine about a week or so ago, and we both agreed that they only have a window of about 3 to 6 months to get something really big done, because by next summer, people will start talking about the next congressional election, and suddenly individuals who might be willing to pass an immigration bill will suddenly become a bit more hesitant to. There will be unexpected problems in the Biden administration. It happens to everybody. So it's very, very interesting to see. So in addition, just to let you know, in the news, I think what you'll follow over the next few months has to do with the undocumented immigrants. That's really the big topic everyone will talk about. But this immigration proposal also has a provision in it that will get rid of some of the backlogs in different immigration categories, including some of the employment-based immigration backlogs. I'll give you an example. I have a lot of clients who are from India, and those people, when they go through the green card process, because there are so many people over the last 10 to 15 years who are from India who've come here, they have a very long backlog. Right now, the number of permanent green cards are handed out by country. And we don't have a lot of people coming from Sweden, for example, but we have a lot more people coming from India. So that's another big issue. And interestingly, there's a huge thing of politics that goes along with that issue that really doesn't make the newspaper, doesn't make the nightly news, because it's kind of I call it an inside baseball type issue. The topic is known as the visa backlog. The problem is the same issue that affects people from India also affects people from China. And as everyone knows, the United States relationship with India is very, very different than China. There are not a lot of people on Capitol Hill who want to do anything right now to help the Chinese Communist Party. They don't. And so the question will become politically, will there be a way that we can help India, which, like the United States, is an open, multi-ethnic, politically messy country like the United States, in a way that does not reward China, who has done some awful things over the last year. That's another a great political thing that goes on. And really, that's the big issues that are going to be going on this year. Will an issue like that, there's visa backlog that is very important among American IT industry. It's very important for the American universities who have a lot of researchers who are from overseas. Will that cause a problem in a way that might stop the pathway to a green card for all the people who are here who do not have immigration status? Is just it'll be very, it's going to be a fascinating year. There was some hope among the immigration activists that on day one, the Biden crowd was going to do a lot more, that was really effective for a lot of people, millions of people. Now, for some people who deal with people on the border, people in detention centers, the executive orders were a step in the right direction. What I've been told from friends of mine is that the reason why the Biden immigration executive orders didn't cover everyone is they want to give the political process a chance to work out over the next few months to see if they can get a good number of Republicans on board on what can be a really, really big issue. But it's going to be it's going to be a really amazing, for me, for about 6 months. I want to say one thing just to give you an example of how unexpected immigration can be. Years ago in the 1990s, I worked on Capitol Hill. I was a Republican staffer. I met my wife working for a Republican senator from New Mexico. And so we know what life has been like having the Trump administration run immigration. The adjudication for cases has been very difficult. But interestingly, for a lot of the cases that I personally handle, I do a lot of work for cancer researchers and petroleum engineers. One of the cases I file is something called the National Interest Waiver case. It's actually been very, very good during the Trump years. It actually comes as a real surprise when I talk to clients of mine who say, am I eligible to do one of these cases? I'm concerned. Everyone says it's so hard under Trump. For my little slice of immigration, it's been nice. Interestingly, the Democratic Party, and especially the people close to Biden, they're under a tremendous pressure to do a much better job than the Trump crowd. So when it comes to some of the employment-based immigration, that is for whether they're IT workers or cancer researchers, entrepreneurs, there's a lot of hope that in addition to making legislative changes, that there will be a new attitude when it comes to adjudications. And that's yet another thing I think will be very, very, very interesting to watch. Okay. I wanted to do two more things. I wanted to give you one of my favorite stories from a case I handled recently. And then if it's okay, I was going to open it up for questions. I do a lot of cases, these national interest waiver cases, for example, are primarily used by really geniuses, PhD cancer researchers, people with PhDs in chemical engineering. But fortunately, the law does not say you need to have a PhD. In fact, it only says you need to have an advanced degree, which is a master's degree. In fact, it can be a bachelor's degree and 5 years of work experience. So an individual came to me about a year ago now, and she had lost her job. She had lost her immigration status. But under a particular law, we had an opportunity to very quickly file a case. What made her case so difficult was that she was an accountant, and she had a master's degree in accounting. But unlike the cancer researchers who give fancy presentations at conferences, and they published peer-reviewed articles that are used by other researchers. She was just kind of a typical, she was an accountant doing some tax work for one of the big accounting companies. And so we looked at what she did, and we pointed out the fact that the work she does is incredibly important for a lot of companies. While her case was going on, she got a follow-up job working for a restaurant company, a franchise restaurant company with more than 500 locations. And I asked her, well, could you please add up the number of employees you have right now? And she told me that they have somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 permanent and part-time employees. So we pointed out that for a lot of those, especially the franchisees, what keeps their heads above water during COVID is proper accounting practices. And we made that argument to the Immigration Service. We pointed out how complex this is, that you really need people who know what they're doing. And the Immigration Service said yes. So she was ecstatic, because when I first met her, she thought she was going to have to go home to a country that she really did not want to go back to. So that's an example that even during the Trump years, where the word on the street is that immigration is super hard, it was good. And I'm hopeful that when it comes to more cases for people like that, and this is a super smart woman, that the Biden administration will do a fine job. It'll be interesting to watch. But with that, rather than me going on what I think, I wanted to see if you guys had any questions about things you may have heard about. Jorge?
So I have a question about refugees. We used to get quite a bit of refugees just because some of the apartments around here lend themselves, have 4-bedroom apartments. So these big groups are coming from refugee camps. And our experience has been, as you mentioned, the kids, they assimilate really quick. And we have several kids that are in college that 5-6 years ago were in a refugee camp. And some of them had never been to school. And, over the course of a few years, they're in college or graduated high school. And I think they're going to contribute to society. So I'm wondering if you think we're going to be starting to get more refugees again.
The answer is, under the Biden proposal, the answer is yes. At this point, I believe the annual number of refugees is 55,000. Currently in the bill, it's been set at 80,000. And at this point, it's a number. That's the easiest thing in politics, is to change the number. And what makes the refugee program very interesting is that the way the United States State Department gets involved is that they fund different refugee programs in each state that is run by state refugee settlement programs. And Texas has one, and Houston has always been a location for that. And I can say this as somebody who immigrated from Boston. The great thing about Houston is everyone's got a funny accent. And, so I see that. And I also think that when it comes to the politics, that a lot of people, that there's a tradition in American history. We like to be nice to refugees. And I think that'll go through. I think it will. But that's one of the big political issues going forward, to see whether or not the crowd in DC can kind of, I don't mean step into a smoky back room and make deals, but really start working with each other again on what is a very contentious issue. Gwen?
I just wanted to share a very dear friend of mine, Rahina Surendaran. She's an Indian lady. She came here as a student, ended up with 2 master's degrees, finally went through everything. She called me last night, okay? She came in 96, remember, okay? She's getting to take her oath next week. So we'll have one more new citizen. But, you know, I was just struck after I got off the phone with her. I thought, I don't think that most of us realize that unless you're some big fancy scientist, like you're talking about, or something that's just like, oh yeah, we got to have that to save the world. You know, Rahina is a landscape architect, you know?
And the timing, the effort it takes is very, very long. I mean, one of the I'll give you two quick political stories. One of the reasons why the United States has among the reasons why we have a problem with illegal immigration. One is the economy is doing better than most Central American countries, so people want to come here. But in addition to that, for a lot of people who do not have college degrees, and for many people who have a bachelor's degree, for example, or perhaps an associate's level degree, there really isn't a pathway to get a green card. If a company wants to sponsor you, it takes a very, very long time. It really does. It's just an interesting. So I'm lucky. I have all these genius people I work with, which is really fantastic. Most people for example, here in Houston and really around the country, in the high tech community, understand that I mean, if you list the fastest growing 1,000 high tech companies in the last 20 years, almost all of them have founders, not 100% of the founders, but all of them have 2 or 3 founders who are from overseas. And that's a great opportunity for the United States. As a country, we're very lucky that for a lot of people, there's nowhere else to go. I'll give you an example. I have one of my largest group of clients are from Nigeria. And Nigeria is a country that most people are unaware that within the next 10 to 20 years, the population of Nigeria will exceed that of the United States. So that on a worldwide basis, the top 3 countries will not be China, India, and the United States. It will be China, India, and Nigeria, followed by the United States. And we, the United States, are lucky that culturally the Nigerians, when they think about leaving Nigeria, they may temporarily take a job in China, for example, if somebody has a position for them. But culturally, they look toward the UK or to the United States. And it's going to be that is going to be a fascinating thing to watch over the next 20 years, to have a very, very large, technologically advanced, a lot of oil and gas country that really wasn't there. I mean, the population has grown so much in the last 50 to 75 years. It's going to really be fascinating. But we're very lucky that if you're a really smart person in Nigeria and you want to leave, the mindset is they come to the United States, and that's true everywhere. I'm a huge critic of China. The Chinese Communist Party is a disaster. But I'll tell you, if you're a successful person from China and you come to the United States, it's a huge breath of fresh air that you can, if you want to, really make fun of Donald Trump. And you can really make fun of Joe Biden and no one really cares. Where that's something no matter how much money you have in the bank back home in China, you can't make fun of your local city councilor. I mean, if you haven't been following, there was a great story in the last 2 or 3 months about a man named Jack Ma, who is essentially China's Zuckerberg. That guy disappeared for 2 months. And no one, and he just showed up at a conference last week, talking really polite. No one knows what happened. So we're lucky that people want to come to the United States. It really is.
Just to follow up there, Mark,
Mm-hmm.
Rahina told me last night that she did not know all these years since '96. She did not know that anybody here in this country, whether you're a citizen or not, is free to say your mind.
Interesting.
So for all these years, she's been very careful.
Yeah, I must say among my clients, goodness, none of them keep their mouths shut. They're American. They just, it's, I always say one of my favorite, and I say this as a political joke because it's got a bit of a laugh behind it, that among a lot of the Republican activists, the joke is that we have to be nice to the immigrants because eventually all their children will vote Republican. Just it's a tradition after a few generations. It's the process. But it's going to be fun to watch over the next 3 months, whether or not the Democrats can work things through Congress. It's a harder thing to do. And again, I always say this is my opinion. The great miracle of the American political system is it's almost impossible to get anything done in Washington, D.C. So if you'd like to run a food pantry like Jorge, you end up going to a local church and a local organization and you set it up yourself and you get it done rather than waiting for a group of people in the capital city to get it done. And I'm a huge fan of how difficult it is to get things done. On the other hand, you know, there has to be a process. So it'll just be for those of us who both enjoy public policy and the politics that go behind it, it's going to be a very, very interesting few months. Kathy?
Yeah, I'm just from the human resources perspective, and I work with a lot of HR people. And the question is, you know, what about the old, you know, I mean, I think it was 18,000 was the cap this past year, which was like the lowest ever. You know, you always hit the max every year anyway. But what about all the people that are in the hopper, China and India, where it would take generations to, you know, to get in illegally? What do you think is going to happen with that?
That's a big issue. One of the political issues that comes up all the time is if you have an individual who was here in the United States, let's say for 3 or 4 years, and this bill, if passed, will put them on a path to getting some type of authorized status. And on the other hand, you have somebody else as a family member back home in Poland or in the Ukraine or wherever, and they've been waiting for a long time. Is there fairness in doing that? And there's no easy answer to that. There really isn't.
Is it January 1 was the cutoff? Is that true? Because the problem is the borders are having major problems with people trying to get in.
Oh yeah.
In anticipation of, you know, being okay.
Yeah, and I'm going to say something again. This is my take about the people around Joe Biden. We had already one caravan that made it up to, you know, Guatemala from Honduras. From what I've been told, at one point it was stopped. Now another one is starting. I would imagine that the new people around Biden are talking to everyone in Mexico and Central America, desperately saying, please don't have that make it to the border. Because if 6 weeks from now there are 37,000 people on the border, that's not going to be good. That's for you know, a lot of people here in Houston know, whether they're friends or people we know at church who've been here without an immigration status for 15 years. They're part of the community. We want to help those people. If the southern border is overrun, that's not going to be good. It really isn't. It's going to be very interesting. I always have to add, and I say this to my clients all the time, about building the wall on the Mexican border, which has been a big controversial issue. Having grown up in Boston, I know that if the Mexican border touched Massachusetts, we would already have 11 walls. And everybody's brother and everybody's cousin would have a job working on the wall. It would be a government jobs program. And that's going to be, you know, again, you can't take politics out of immigration. So it's going to, I wish I was a fly on the wall listening to what the Biden crowd now is desperately saying to the authorities down in Guatemala and in Honduras. Because if they're overwhelmed and you know, you've seen some video in the last few weeks. It's easy to overwhelm if you have 10,000 people and the Guatemalan police force doesn't want to use deadly force. They don't want to use rubber bullets. That's a big, it's going to be, and there's no easy answer to that. Is in the same way there's no easy answer to the fairness question. You know, do you reward people who've been here? One of the ways I think they're going to, for me, one of the questions is what will the impact be on employment-based immigration? Would it be easier for people to just quit their job and say they're illegal? And the answer, in my opinion, will be no. They're going to drag out the process for people who are here without status. For me, if someone comes to me and they're qualified, they can get a green card within, whether it's 6 months, a year, 18 months. And so there are still benefits for doing that.
So Mark, thank you very much for a very informative perspective on immigration. You know, as an immigrant myself, I find this topic very fascinating, and it's never boring. Let's put it that way.
It's gonna be fantastic, and there will be lawsuits about it, and it's gonna be. One of the things I've always loved about immigration is in terms of the law and politics. It's like a world unto itself. There will be talk about, for people who have been here out of status. Well, what if somebody's been out here out of status and they were arrested for drunk driving 7 years ago? What if somebody was arrested for relatively small time drug dealing, like selling marijuana? Marijuana is now, most places you can do that now. What's that going to be? There's an infinite number of questions that come up.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed